back to the Sunday to Society podcast. I'm your host, Riley, where we help you go from the pews to the public square. We release new episodes every Monday at 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific on your favorite podcasting apps as well as YouTube. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to take a second to leave us a review and a comment on your favorite podcasting apps, wherever you're able to do so. The topic is using media as a tool in the public square. And I'm joined today by Drew Carter, who is the owner of Drew S. Carter Photo and Video, as well as Web Weaver. And Drew, it's nice to have you on.
Hey, Riley, thank you for having me on. This is really exciting. I know this is something that, you and I have been talking about for a while, but man, Riley, you need to start a podcast, you need to do this. And it's just really exciting to see you kind of launch out and do this and it resonate with so many people.
Yeah, it's been quite a learning process, but it's been fun. I'm enjoying it. And we've been talking about this for, goodness, probably several years now at this point, but here it is, a reality. So, Drew, take a moment to tell the folks about your media business and your Web Weaver business.
Yeah, so kind of two sides to the same coin in the sense that I've really made it my mission and have really found favor in the area of helping churches communicate effectively with their congregations. And so our intention is to, through photo, video, web development, communication styles and strategies, public speaking, any umbrella that has to do with communications or interactions with, the pastor, lay people in the congregation, and then into the community. So we're really dialed in on focusing on making those interactions really meaningful and really impactful. We do that through video, also shoot weddings and senior portraits, family portraits, things like that, with a concentration on helping churches and nonprofits share their vision for the world with the world.
So you are really involved in all kinds of forms of media then.
Yeah, so we do produce some podcast shows, we do web development, photo and video, social media management, even just broad marketing and communication strategies. We've even delved into AI has kind of made the whole landscape a little bit interesting. And, part of communications is learning to adapt. And so we're figuring out, hey, how can this be best leveraged by churches to make the most impact?
Very good. What inspired you to start your media company? I know you did a little bit in college, but what really inspired you to take it and run with it?
Yeah, so I guess I've always had an affinity for cameras, and at the time maybe I didn't realize it. So I remember when I was like in middle school, or maybe even earlier, I found one of my dad's old camcorders, and it was the type where you put the little tape in the side of it, clicked it in, and then you could record to tape.
Yep.
And so my dad actually used that to film some friends' weddings, ironically. So I found that and, started playing around with it. And this was right around when YouTube was actually starting to become a thing and was becoming like relevant. So I remember Samsung had these like vertical camcorders that were like 6 feet waterproof depth. And, they're vertical. They had a wrist strap. You held onto them and it was like it shot in 1080 and everyone was like, wow, that's really great. And I remember taking that and shooting like stupid videos with my friends. We were watching all the big YouTube channels at the time, and it was like the wild west of YouTube. And so like the most random things would become super viral. I guess some of that's still the case, but we were just making like funny skit videos and throwing them together and forcing our parents and family to watch them, even though they were absolutely terrible. But, that I think is what got me interested in this field, just pursuing that, just having fun as a hobby. Through high school, I kind of drifted a little bit, didn't really pay as much attention into that. Really, the church culture I was in, I was trying to become somebody that I really wasn't to fit in. And, it was, whatever the pastor's kids liked, that, you tried to mirror that to fit in. And I kind of set that interest off to the side a little bit. And then when I got to college, had a chance to jump into the audiovisual ministry at the church where we went to school and just dove into that, started diving into social. Next thing I know, friends started asking me to shoot their weddings. And I was like, are you sure you want me to shoot your wedding? I've never shot a wedding before. And somehow them seeing me walk around the college with a phone on an Osmo somehow translated to wedding cinematographer. I don't know how they made that correlation, but I really kind of sat down and did some research, figured out, hey, what's the best way to do this? Completely new to the industry. I didn't have anyone to talk to. So I scoured internet, YouTube, just kind of did my best to try to piece together the best way to shoot a wedding. And I was off by quite a bit, but I also got some things right. And so with anything, as get practice and get reps in, you start correcting your course. Like, okay, maybe I did 30% right and I trashed 70% of this. Well, okay, like that's not cause to give up. Let's aim for a 40-60 share and then like 50-50. And then next thing you know, it starts going the other way. And next thing you know, like you're kind of where you're supposed to be. So that kind of evolved. And as I started to gain some skill in this area, a lot of churches in the circle I was in were really weak in this area. And it really opened up a door for me to have some influence and to really, with a blank canvas, kind of create a culture and broad strokes of, hey, this is church media and communications is actually really important, and have been able to help several churches kind of accomplish their mission through that avenue.
Yeah, I think that's important, especially in today's climate. I mean, we think of media as like video and audio, and that is that. But I mean, there's social media, there's podcasts, there's all kinds of forms of media out there now. And I think for churches, we need to tap into those things and use those as tools to reach more people. I remember, I think it might have been just the time that we grew up in the 2010s. Like, I think every kid our age took a video camera or like a digital camera and recorded the dumbest videos. And we never uploaded them. At least me and my brother never did. But kids today, I guess they have TikTok. So that's kind of their equivalency of that.
I have those files somewhere. I don't know where they are.
Oh, that would be hilarious.
But
You know
I
what?
need to find them, and I need to do like some kind of edit.
Yeah, that would be hilarious. I wonder if I have either me or my brother might have those video files somewhere on some hard drive. That would be hilarious to watch. I haven't watched them in years. You mentioned that you help churches do videos, and I know you also do missions videos as well. How do you use your media company to bring more people to the faith and strengthen fellow Christians?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think if we're not careful, we can fall into this trap thinking that there's only certain careers or certain competency paths, for lack of a better term, that result in people hearing and being influenced by the gospel. Bird's eye view, I think those of us who are children of God, who want to honor him with our lives and use our God-given gifts and abilities for him, I think may have direct or even indirect influence in how some of those people may come to the faith. The Bible talks about how there's some people that plant, some people water, and then there's some that actually get to see the increase of our labor of promoting the gospel to the culture around us. And so I view a lot of what, the result of the work that I do is there's definitely some direct fruit that we see from that in churches, with a good looking website.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are going to check your church online before they even come in person. So it's really important that you really have a good front door visual for people to see, and not something that's fake, but something that is an accurate representation of who you are as a community of believers. And you may see some direct influence from that. And it may just lead someone to watching a video. It then prompts them to ask another question in their heart and mind. And months may go by. And then next thing you know, they come across another piece of Christian content and it sparks more interest. So I think we get this idea that if we don't see direct results immediately, that then it was a waste. But man, there's people who are on a lifelong journey of coming to know Christ. And by us putting content into what is now the public square, the internet, I don't think you can faithfully carry the gospel if you're not engaging online at this point. The statistics are just insane. Like the amount of people that engage or are involved on social, the door is like, this is the most exciting time to be alive as a Christian because the opportunity is greater than it's ever been. You may never see direct fruit from a podcast episode or a social video you put out, but that's where kind of faithfulness comes in. And I think God uses it to bring honor to him.
Yeah, I know you and I have had this discussion before about Christians adapting to technology, and I've done an episode on it. But we were talking about the printing press one time and how Christians took the printing press and absolutely ran with it. I mean, Martin Luther, he used the printing press to print out his 95 Theses to get that out all over Germany and really kick off the Protestant Reformation. But they were able to adapt to technology and the internet media. That's our technology now. The way that people find your church now is through social media or videos or websites. They're not just driving around anymore and just looking for churches. They have probably watched your church on live stream or looked at the website or social media several times before they've even darkened the door of your church. That's why
Yeah.
it's important for these media outlets to be done not only well, but be done professionally, we could say, and done in such a way that, accurately represents what we're trying to do. But, the Bible does say, whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with all thy might.
Yeah. And kind of to your point, think about when you're looking to, say you're in a new town and you're trying to find a place to eat. You're most likely, you're not going to, nowadays, you're not going to drive around town looking for just something random to speak to you of,
Yep.
oh, yeah, that sounds good.
Yep.
No, you're going to go to Apple Maps or Google Maps and you're going to try to find places to eat. Or if you're interested in a specific type of food, you're going to Google, this type of restaurant near me. Or you're going to go to Yelp and you're going to find locals and see what's got the reviews. Now, some may take offense to the correlation of correlating churches to restaurants. Although even here in the Bible Belt, there's more churches than McDonald's. But the point is, people, for anything they're looking for in their life now, they're not just going to stumble upon there's exceptions, right? But exceptions don't break the rule. If anything, the exception almost clarifies and doubles down that the rule does exist. And so you may have someone walk into your church because they were driving by and saw it, but 99% of the time, people are going to look at you ahead of time and find church near me or, Baptist church near me or kids ministry near me or VBS or whatever. So that's how people are finding things today is they're from the comfort of their home or right before they're about to leave the office, they're pulling out their mobile device and trying to find what it is they're looking for. And then they go. And, reviews matter. So I'm not going to go, even if it's a chain that I really like, if the restaurant has really bad reviews, I'm going to think twice before I go there.
No, I definitely agree. The church that I pastor is actually in the middle of a neighborhood, and it's not a very highly trafficked neighborhood. The church building kind of sits in the corner of the neighborhood, and so people aren't driving by the church every single day unless they live on the street that it's on. And so the way that we can get out into the community is through media and through different outreaches here in the community. So yeah, I think media is important. If you're not getting the gist here, we're both saying that media is very important.
And yes, I am biased.
Yes, yes, you are. The church and the culture gap. We talk about the church and the culture gap almost every single day between the two of us. But even in media, there's an obvious disconnect sometimes. And that could be for all various reasons. Drew, what would you say to believers who are hesitant to engage publicly in media?
Yeah, so there's a couple distinctions that I think maybe are really good to draw here that may provide some insight into my view or kind of where we're going to next. So I think a lot of what has happened in our churches is we've treated method and message almost synonymously. And I think on paper, if you were to explain the difference, I think probably everybody would agree that those are different. But when it comes to actual practice, when you try to start mentioning, like, hey, maybe certain methods don't really work like they used to, they act like you're, trying to rob them of their rich Christian heritage and faith of, 2,000 years. The method is just how the message is carried. So I think it's really important for churches to understand that, hey, our message really shouldn't change. Who we are really shouldn't change. And that, we have something to offer that every other institution does not have. And so we really need to lean into that because that's what makes us unique. Not just because it makes us unique, but that's because what our Lord and Savior commanded us to do.
Right.
And so when we start to veer from that, that's when you really start to run into some problems. And we do see that with a lot of churches who are actually very media front. So I think what's happened is we've created this false dichotomy as well, where we just assume anything modern or trendy is evil because we see a lot of churches who maybe are misusing some things. And so we just say, oh, well, they're off the path because they're using these things. It's like, no, that's a false dichotomy. It's not actually the reason why. They just happen to be happening at the same time. And
Right.
so when you think about methods evolving, that's kind of, I know in a previous episode, you've talked about technology throughout history and how Christians have utilized those technological advances to further the kingdom.
Yep.
That's kind of what I'm talking about. So before you had the printing press, a lot of scriptures and a lot of not just scriptures, but books in general were handwritten. And so the method to do that was very time consuming, very expensive. You didn't have wide distribution. Well, with the printing press, a new method, right? You could take the exact same message, utilize that new method, and now distribution was much greater and you had much more influence and much more fruit for your labor. And so when we think about that, when we think about how churches operated in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I think a lot of churches actually did really well in really leaning in and taking advantage of all the opportunities they had to maximize their impact. As we've gone into the late 90s, early 2000s, and on, I think there's a wide disparity between the amount of churches who are effectively doing that and the ones that aren't. And so I'm not fully sure as to all the reasons why. I just know, like, personal anecdote, there was a lot of churches that basically from the pulpit talked about how evil Facebook was, not the use of Facebook in terms of, hey, using Facebook for slander or for putting, information that didn't need to be out there or whatever the case may be. Just the entity itself existing was problematic for the Christian, and the Christian should not use it. Well, 99, and yes, I am calling you out, people who did this in love. 99% of pastors said, oh, we'll never live stream, whatever. Pandemic 2020, COVID-19, we're all locked up for a few months because of this disease. Next thing you know, everybody and their brother wants to start live streaming. And then it's almost like we forgot everything we said the past 10, 15 years. And it's like, well, that is what it is. But that's an example of, hey, we attacked a method and we became super clingy to this method that we had used prior and conflated it with our message, when instead of using this new method as an avenue to promote our message. And so I think, man, if we're not careful, we'll do the same thing with AI. So,
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
and so we just need to be really cognizant of understanding the difference between the two. I think that's the reason so many people may be hesitant, is because it's so cutting edge and it changes so fast. There may be some level where it's like intimidating to learn it because by the time you figure it out, it's different and it's really new and it happens really fast. And part of it too may just be that maybe we're just stuck in a rut on some things. And I think we need to be ready and willing to kind of admit that and adjust where necessary.
Yeah. I remember in COVID in March of 2020, everything shuts down and we're trying to scramble around to figure out, live streaming, and we've got smartphones, so we can do it all from a smartphone now. You don't have to have, a complicated system, which makes it fantastic. I mean, that's my church now. That's what we do. We just use it, and especially phones now have gotten so good with quality, and we're always trying to improve it and get it better than it was, before. And so my church now, I'm doing that, hopefully implementing that, this weekend with some new microphones and things for our live stream. But yeah, I think with AI too, like if we choose to ignore it, it's not going anywhere. And so
Nope.
choosing to ignore it, I think we're missing out on something that we can use as a tool to make our lives easier, so we can spend more time on things that matter rather than some things that would necessarily not matter. So how do you think or how can Christians, just generally speaking, how can they use media personally to shape culture rather than react to it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think it kind of goes hand in hand with maybe what we were just talking about.
I'd agree.
So you know the distinction between message and method. When we're talking about media, there's content and then there's delivery, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we're doing right now, this podcast is a piece of content, right?
Yep.
And so content is information, something of value, a resource, something that brings value to the people who consume the content. Now, how that content gets delivered is going to be in a plethora of ways. You know, it's going to be on all the podcasting platforms. So that's a piece of content, the podcast, going out on a platform, an avenue of communication to your listeners. There's also probably going to be short 60-second clips that are posted as reels or social posts that go out on social platforms. Okay, so that's what people would call micro content. So you have your main piece of content, which is this podcast. I don't know how long it'll end up being, but you know, the piece of content that provides value to the consumer. You then have micro content, which is pieces of content taken from the main piece that's distributed. And so when you start thinking about that, in conjunction with the fact that social media is the new, not even just social media, but the internet in general is the new public square, then you begin to interpret things as, okay, how would a Christian interact and influence in the public square? You know, and that's kind of the theme of the podcast is Sunday to Society. You know, you're taking the truths you hear from the pulpit and in the pew and you take it to the public square. So figuring out how, you know, how do I influence people in my everyday life? It's just another piece of what it is we're already to be doing. And so the very obvious thing that may be overdone, and I say that with some hesitancy, is people posting long form paragraphs, their testimony, all the stuff that's low hanging fruit in the sense that that's kind of a more obvious thing to do
Mm-hmm.
is to give your testimony. Now, I think you should, but I also think your testimony is more than just a spiel you give. I think it's your life patterned after the life of Christ. So let that permeate into every aspect of your being, right? And so there's things you can do where you can be encouraging to people. You can build community with the people on social media. Now, there are some cases where there's people maybe you have on your socials that you don't know, but there may be a lot of people that you do know. And I think we'll probably take some time to talk about how churches can better leverage a social presence to maximize their efforts. But on a personal level, man, I think you just need to just be a Christian on social like you'd be a Christian in real life. Share positive, encouraging content. Don't be negative. Don't criticize. You know, don't post anything there that could be harmful to your testimony or that could shame the name of Christ. I think just as you would walk uprightly in your physical realm here on earth, I think you should try to walk uprightly and use speech that's, you know, savory and use a conversation or behavior that's encouraging online as well.
Yeah. It kind of really goes into the next question about Christians using social media or just media in general, drive a gap wedge even further. We shared last week a post by somebody who's a Christian that was, I would say, borderline controversial, and watching the people respond to this post, and you see Christians really infighting amongst themselves. Let's say you're somebody who's on the fence, debating whether or not you want to become a Christian, and you see something like that on something that was really insignificant, and you're seeing these Christians argue. I mean, they will die on this hill for the topic that was being discussed, and you're somebody who's debating whether or not you want to be a Christian. You see that. Wouldn't you think that, why would I want to be a part of this when these people are just arguing and bickering all of the time?
Yeah, I agree. But, you know, I didn't realize that there were petty people on social media arguing about petty things. I'm just hearing this now for the first time. I no. Yeah, I think it's a real problem. I don't think we fully know how big of a problem it is. And so what I've seen happen is a lot of people will jump on a certain post and be negative and criticize. And 20 years ago, man, you would have never even criticized this person for this thing, and you probably would have been friends with them in real life. So what I see happening is a lot of pastors are actually chucking grenades at each other. And what we're doing is we're actually causing a further divide, not just between, the church and culture, but between churches. We're causing a major divide that maybe wouldn't have even been there 10 years ago, even, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And like, I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but you're really not gonna change anybody's mind on social media. Now, again, like I've said, exceptions do exist. Uh, Exceptions don't break the rule. In large part, really what you should be looking at social media as is how can I leverage it to strengthen my influence with people who I already influence. So what I think we do is we jump on there, we whip our opinions out, and we think we're just a magnet for controversy. And then we get a bunch of people fighting in the comments, taking sides, and it's really not productive. And so if your point was to just go viral and get a bunch of clicks and all this stuff, like, yeah, I guess you did it, but you're actually taking away from the glory that's due to Christ, because instead of his people worshiping him and having unity and breaking bread and fellowshipping, we're lobbing grenades at each other almost exclusively for no reason. Obviously, again, there's exceptions, I suppose. I've yet to see it, but when you're calling somebody out on Facebook and you're doing what we call like a hit post, right? You're not going to convince anyone to your side. All you're really doing is the people who already agree with you are going to continue to agree with you. And all you're actually doing is the people who disagree with you, you're just actually making that group bigger.
Yep.
And so you actually lose influence, and that's really not what you want. Now, there may be some people out there who would say that is what they want, and, God bless, and that's fine. If that's what you want to do, you can do that, I suppose. But really, what I would challenge the listeners to think about is how can I use our social media account to further lift up, equip, and edify people who are already following our account, we already are within our sphere of influence. And so that's why we see like personal accounts get so much more traction than like church accounts or organization accounts, is because you really follow social media because you're trying to follow a certain person, personal brand. So I always encourage churches I work with that the pastor as a person be engaged on social. Now, some people may be uncomfortable with that idea initially, and I get it, but you'll actually in the long term see more results because, when people go to the church, not 99 out of 100 times, people want to know who the pastor is. In the week to week, they're engaging with the pastor because the pastor is delivering the message. So that relationship has to be there. And so the more you can do to build and foster that relationship, whether that be in person or online, the better results you'll have.
Agreed. Switching topics or switching directions here. The church or the Christian's role in media. I know you've had actually you just finished up with a intern over the course of this last college semester. So you have a little bit of expertise in this, I guess now. What would you do, or how would you mentor, equip a younger Christian? Say somebody's in high school, getting ready to graduate high school, and they want to get into media, film, or tech of some sort. What would you say to that person, and what type of advice would you give them?
Yeah, so kind of similar to my story is if this is a path that you're interested in and a gift you feel as though God has given you and you have a talent for it and a knack for picking it up, and you are maybe seeing some early results and some things you're doing, just like anything else, you just need to, for lack of a better term, like geek out on it. So figure out all it is you can learn about it. Look in your area, see if there's other people in that field that can help you accomplish your goals. Ken Coleman with Ramsey Solutions actually has a lot of good resources on finding your purpose and fulfilling your mission as a person. I think he's got a book even called From Paycheck to Purpose. So definitely, look him up, get those resources, figure out. And the truth of the matter is, in terms of mentorship, you may have to go outside of the church world to get exposure and understanding and be equipped in media to be able to bring that skill set and that tool back into your church to use it effectively. And the reason I say that is because we went about 20 years where, again, this, I say churches in broad stroke, there's a lot of churches who do this really well. So understand that that caveat is here. But in large brushstroke, if we're talking about this, churches have not really been historically well known in the short period of time for having like super great media and digital and design, right?
Right.
That's when, we're just not good at it. We don't have a lot of people that are skilled in that area. And I think more than just media, it's in the arts in general. Like
Yeah.
if you look at church job postings, obviously pastors are number one in the most demand, but number two and number three are almost always exclusively a music guy and then audio visual or graphics, right? So it's kind of like we just haven't developed the arts because we didn't think it was important. And so now here we are, 2025. And now people are starting to wake up that it's, hey, this is actually kind of important, but we don't actually have anybody to actually mentor Christians who are gifted in this area. Part of that is because we don't actually have the skill set. Part of it too is we actually still have a good percentage of American churches who are still very much opposed to utilizing some of this stuff. And so as long as that roadblock is there, you won't really see much traction or fruit in the church context in these specific areas. But yeah, Riley mentioned that I've done internships. That's something I still very much am open and still am doing. So if that's something you're interested in, at the end of the show, give you contact info. But I am in process of working on a solution for churches in this area. There's not much I can really talk about now, but we are at work to try to bridge this gap because it is very concerning that a lot of our churches are actually like 25 plus years behind on the tech. And if that doesn't get remedied, we're going to have huge gaps in our communications. Part of my mission now is, hey, how can we equip, Christians in these churches to try to make up that gap of 25 years so that we can be effective in our communication?
Yeah. I mean, most colleges, Christian colleges, they're not even offering any type of program, let alone a 4-year or a 2-year program. They might have graphic design, and that is, part of media, but audiovisual, film, photography, videography, all of these different things. I mean, that's part of media too. You use in church all the time. And there's very few colleges that offer that type of program in a Christian environment. Of course, you can go to a liberal arts state school and find those things no problem, or some specialized, type of school. And I think part of the reason why Christian colleges don't have those type of programs is because we lack the skill set. We don't have people to teach these types of programs with the right credentials. Now, I think once we do and we start figuring out that this is really important, we start implementing college programs or other types of programs that equip people with these skill sets, I think we'll see a big boom of media. I was watching a church this afternoon, a church that you really like, that's really big into media, and just noticing their sermon graphics, their projection wall, all these different media outlets that they're using, and they're effectively communicating through their media, their sermon graphics, their titles, their everything, and they're doing a great job in effectively communicating what they're trying to get across. Of course, it's a rather large church, so they have a little more resources, but they're doing a great job in that. I guess you've kind of already mentioned it a little bit, but how can churches better support Christians who are called to media and arts and things of the such?
Yeah. And so I think this is a really good time to, I know you just mentioned resources. Having good quality content is actually easier to achieve than it's ever been before. It's more accessible. It's more culturally accepted that, media is just going to be a part of the communication plan. And so it's really not that hard to invest in people that have an interest in this. And again, this is something where I'm working on something, an avenue and a channel to kind of emphasize this. So more to come in the months ahead. But when that time comes, happy to disclose that and roll something out that I think is really going to be beneficial in this area, and I think will provide value and kind of help invest in people in your church that are interested. I think too, when churches talk about media in general, they kind of just use it as an umbrella term when there's so many concentrations within that umbrella. Just like you have in the medical field, you have so many different concentrations and different aspects of that. You have general doctors, and then you've got doctors that get very specific in a very specific thing. And so, same thing with media. You have copy, which is writing and using words to tell a story and send a message. You have videography, you have lighting, you have audio engineering, you have session recording, you have graphic design, you have illustration, you have graphic design in the sense of like After Effects or like motion graphics, right? And so the list goes on of all these different nuances and specifics. So a lot of churches that I've seen that have some budget in the terms of being able to bring somebody on, what ends up happening is, since the only people right now that seem to be really interested in media is people who are our age or younger, fresh out of college and don't really have life or ministry experience, they're getting brought into a church job and they're expected to do everything under that umbrella of media. And so your pastor's scrolling on TikTok or Reels or whatever, and he sees Church of the Highlands or Elevation or somebody do some really fantastical thing. He's like, oh, I want to do that. And what they don't realize is they have whole teams dedicated to doing that stuff. And you're asking the one intern to pull an impossible miracle in a bunch of areas that they don't even specialize in to try to produce something. And part of that just comes from a lack of understanding of media in its full scope and everything that's entailed in making something like that happen. So what I would say is how you can support someone is really dive in and figure out what they're passionate about, what they're skilled in that specific area, and kind of lean into that. I think we're caught up in this race right now because it's super like front facing, that we try to keep up with the Joneses almost in terms of our social presence. So it's like, oh, the church down the road is live streaming, so we have to live stream. Church down the road did this, so we need to do this. And it's like, you need to actually sit down and evaluate, what does our audience resonate with? What is our realistic skill set? And how can we leverage that, meet those in the middle, and try to re-emphasize what we're already doing? And so that's what I would say is, don't burn out your media people. Invest in them, listen to them. And a lot of times they kind of know what they're talking about when they're doing some of these things. I think it's really easy. And again, I'm going to be careful how I word this because I don't want it to be misinterpreted. Don't use pastoral authority in the sense that you can just kind of bulldoze any recommendation and not listen to any advice or any feedback. Obviously, as being one responsible for the spiritual well-being of the church, like, you do need to be involved in this process, but also there may be trends and things happening that you may not fully understand, that your media person who specializes in this area may be able to speak into. And then that's when you guys need to have a good faith conversation, figuring out what makes sense for our identity as a community, as a congregation, as a church, and how does this make sense within our broader communication plan.
Yeah, I mean, your church is going to be able to put out higher quality media. There's various reasons, right? Because your church is immensely bigger than my church. Your church has more media talent to pull from than my church, but we're all trying to get the same message out, right? And the way that we do that might look a little different. You're going to be able to do more video messages, that type of thing. And we could spend tons of time talking about comparing our media to a different church's media. Like you said, seeing somebody who has a whole team create content and then think, well, if they can do it, why can't we do it? In fact, you and I both know that sometimes creating content can be a lot more difficult than it looks.
Yeah, the running joke in the media community is when pastors spend a little bit too much time on social media around Easter and they expect the most fantastical. They basically want it to look like that scene of Elsa on Frozen with the glass castle and
Yep.
everything spiraling. Like that's what they have, and then the budget's like not even anywhere close to making that a reality. And again, that's where just a to have a good faith conversation, you have to have two people who are willing to engage in that. So, media people, you need to be honest and say, hey, like this, I appreciate the vision, but it's kind of misaligned with what we're able to do realistically. And then on the other side, it needs to be, hey, this is kind of what's expected. What can we pull from that and turn into a reality? So
Yep.
don't just throw everything out because it's overwhelming, but actually figure out, hey, what's a good middle point and what can we agree on that we think God will bless and will be effective for the kingdom.
Yeah, no, that's good. We've already talked about a little bit about what does it look like to create content that's both high quality and countercultural. We've kind of beat around the bush for a little bit, but is there anything else you want to add to that particular question?
Yeah, I think so. As we've been talking, this question about what does it look like to create content that's both high quality and countercultural? Well, to start, you as an organization need to have a commitment to being high quality and to being countercultural. So, a lot of times your media is just a reflection, or you want it to be an authentic representation of who you already are and what you're already doing. And so if you don't have the mindset of having high quality and being countercultural, then you won't create content that is that way. Um, and kind of, again, bringing more definition to media specifically, we treat it as an umbrella term that can kind of mean anything involving tech. So we have media departments, we have media ministries, and we don't even necessarily have a mission or vision or purpose for it. We have it because church down the street has it and it's new and everybody's doing it. The purpose for your media arm of your ministry should be to, again, bringing in communications, further and amplify and clarify and bring more value to the message you're already sending. So, how this makes sense is if you're preaching a message and you have a screen that's got your sermon notes on it, all this stuff. I did a whole lecture on this one time where we talked about everyone has a different learning style, right? Some are visual, some are auditory, some are reading, and then some are kinesthetic where they're like read and write, or they have to like use their hands to learn how to do things. An effective communicator is going to utilize or kind of touch on all of those different learning styles to help better carry the messages they're bringing. And media helps us do that very effectively. Got the visual when you're, putting the sermon notes online. If you give handouts, they don't even have to be digital handouts that people scan to, like, it could just be a printout and people follow along and write down the points to your message or the key thoughts or key concepts. And then illustrations help. If there's a way you can do kinesthetic where you get people active and involved, and truthfully, this doesn't even have to be all done at once. What would it look like, Riley, if pastors sat down and figured out, hey, this is the message I believe God is giving me to bring the people this week? How can we emphasize this message in the lives of our congregants throughout the entire week? And so you preach the sermon on Sunday. Maybe on Monday, an excerpt gets clipped 30 to 60 seconds of maybe the key focal point of the sermon, and that gets posted on Monday. And then maybe Tuesday, a newsletter goes out recapping how the service went, what's coming in the week ahead, and just maybe a key verse from that message that relates. And then maybe Wednesday, there's a video that goes out, maybe for kids program that kind of reemphasizes that. Maybe there's an activity that people can do. Social media now makes it to where you can interact and communicate with your congregation every day of the week without them actually physically coming to your church. And so when you look at the statistics of how often people come to church, it's actually truthfully, it's pretty abysmal. The number is not as frequent as any church staff person would want it to be. But I think it's like the average churchgoer maybe goes to church, I think like 8 times a year, I think is the number. And I could be wrong on that, but I know it's around that number. So when you think about, man, if they only came to church 8 times a year, that means I only have 8 hours of influence in their life. We have got to figure out how to maximize that 8 hours. We have to figure out how to extend those. And I think social media and the internet is a tool in which we can use to try to extend that influence we have with our congregants.
Yeah, I had a professor in seminary. He is a pastor in Arizona, and he has a theme for each of his Sunday morning services. Sometimes it goes along with the message, oftentimes it doesn't. But throughout the week, he is posting verses, songs, maybe even a little video clip of something related to the theme that's at hand. And they've put together an entire playbook for years of these different themes, and they're promoting it through social media throughout the week. So that when you come to church on Sunday morning, if you've been following the church's social media platforms, you're already seeing, 5, 6 different posts or even more on the topic or theme of this service. And you've already been inundated with that all week long. And now you're coming to worship God on Sunday morning and you know what the theme is. And you've already been so inundated with it, it just enhances the worship of God even more because you've been already meditating on it throughout the week.
And man, I think that's part of the problem too, is we lack intentionality with what it is we do. I think a lot of times we just kind of coast and make it week to week. And so we really don't ever stop to evaluate what it is that we're doing. And so that's why we have churches that are married to the same methods for the past 30 years, because that's what they've always done. And they've never stopped to take account, hey, how much money are we spending to do this? And what's our ROI?
Yeah.
And then someone may ask, well, how do you measure ROI in a church function? And I think that's actually a really good question. And I don't know all the answers to that. Maybe the simplest answer would be to see how many people is it bringing through the door. But I don't even know that that's the best way you measure that, right? Because there's different aspects and different way to measure what it is that the church is here to do. A lot have proposed that the best way to measure is your ministry initiative leading people to take the next step in their Christian faith. And if it is doing that, then I think it's a successful method, at least for the time being. And I think there's a lot of good in that. I don't know that it's holistic in its solution. I think there's aspects of it that sometimes churches just need to be prepared that, hey, some things we're going to spend money on and we're never going to see an ROI on it here on earth. And I think that's just baked into the equation. I don't know how to account for that yet, but I think that's definitely a thing.
I agree. The whole time we were going through this, I was thinking of the book Rethink Communication. I know you've read it,
Yep.
I've read it. And for those out there listening, Rethink Communication by Phil Bottle. Fantastic book, right? And I know you've taken principles from this book and applied it to your own media. You can take all the principles in that book and apply it to your media and how you communicate through media to the outside world. I would highly recommend reading this book to those of you out there. I know you, Drew, would
Yes.
probably recommend it as well.
Absolutely. That's where I got that 8. I think it's 8 to 10 is the figure he gives in the book. And he does cite his research. So
Yeah.
it's not just a number I'm pulling out of the sky, that there's actual data to back that up. But I think that goes back to talking about how it's easier than ever to create good content. It's
Yeah.
also easier than ever to create really bad content. And what I
Right.
mean by that is, since it's more accessible, the barrier to entry is lower, meaning you get more people in it. So
Mhm.
it used to be super, super expensive to shoot a good quality video. Like, you're talking tens of thousands of dollars just to shoot something that looked professional. But now you can hire a video company for less than $1,500 in some cases and get a really good product, right? And so, some churches may hear that number and be like, holy cow, that's a lot of money. It's all perspective. But all that to say, what makes a good piece of content is not just how nice of a camera you shoot it with. Is the message clearly conveyed? And does the message strip away barriers to entry people may have regarding what it is you're communicating to them about. So I think you need to put just as much money as you spend on equipment, you need to put just as much focus on the people who are doing the communicating and the messages you're communicating, because we get this idea, oh, well, that's the latest and greatest camera. If I get that, that'll solve all my problems. But you still don't know how to clarify your message. You're just going to have a messy message in 8K, right? So it doesn't actually solve anything for you. So we waste a lot of money with all the latest and greatest when, tech's always advancing and it's good to stay up to date in that regard, but it's much more important that the message of what you're saying and the meat of what you're saying is really good and really consumable and effective.
Yeah, I just pulled my copy of the book here. It's been probably a year since I've read through the book. It's so practical. I forgot how practical it was just thumbing through it here. He's got a 7-day social media playbook for pastors. He's got case studies saying that less is more, and he talks about the Cheesecake Factory menu, which is pages on pages of stuff. He's like, you get so overloaded with all of the different options at Cheesecake Factory, when he said, in fact, the less you have, like an In-N-Out menu board, you've got about 8 items, if even that many. And what they do, In-N-Out, is they make good hamburgers. And they do that because they have such a limited menu as opposed to the Cheesecake Factories. I'll link it in the show notes here. Rethink Communication by Phil Bowdle. Fantastic book. I think all church leaders should read this book because it is that good.
Agreed.
Even if you are into media or not, because it's not just for media. Where can people find you, Drew, on social media and find your video work?
Yeah, so I'm very guilty of the saying that, and I forget exactly how it goes, but it's the idea that the shoemaker is so busy making everybody else shoes that he doesn't have shoes on his own feet.
Right.
Currently my website is down for renovation, but it's drewscarter.com, or alternatively, if you want to look into the website business, it's webweaverdigitalllc.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, Drew S. Carter. The middle initial makes it really easy to find me. And so I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and, I'm posting work that I'm doing. I'm posting information that's helpful for people in the church media space. I do, like I said, I shoot weddings, family photos. I do church consulting for either communication strategies, or also if you have an AV team or the makings of an audiovisual team and you need some help kind of giving them direction and next steps. Usually over the course of the weekend, I'll fly in, kind of assess what you have, figure out what next steps are. I'll actually do an in-person serve with your team on a Sunday. So we'll kind of see, hey, this is kind of the church culture, and here's how we do things, and this is the style of our service, and here's how things go. And then what I normally do, depending on previous conversation, we either give like a 6 or 12 month action plan where it's like, okay, here's the goal that you want to have by month 1 completed, and so on and so forth. And then from there, if you want me to come back, I can come back on return visit and just kind of keep that coaching going on, or we kind of pass the baton, whatever makes sense in your context. But yeah, so that's where you can find me.
Sweet. I will link all of those links and social media handles and stuff in the description in the show notes.
Sweet.
So that people can find you more easily. If you found this podcast helpful, I hope you'll leave us a review and a comment on your favorite podcasting app. You can follow the podcasting on social media. You can follow us on Instagram at Sunday to Society, as well as like our Facebook page, which is also Sunday to Society on Facebook as well. You've heard today how media, business, and storytelling can be powerful tools for God's kingdom. The public square is not off limits for Christians. In fact, it's your mission field. And I hope you have taken the things that you've heard today, maybe something to think about and chew on this week, and you will try to implement your own personal social media into the furthering of the kingdom of God. Drew Carter, it was great to have you on. I know we've talked about this for a very, very long time, and it's great to have finally made it into reality.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's a privilege.
You are most welcome. This has been the Sunday to Society podcast. I hope you have a great day, and God bless.